interview and turns it into a complete disaster. In just 32 seconds, a single comment would shatter any chance of a civil conversation and set off a chain reaction that would end with cameras cutting, producers scrambling, and a guest being escorted out of the studio. Anderson Cooper has interviewed presidents, world leaders, survivors of unthinkable tragedies. He has sat across from people in their darkest moments and their brightest triumphs. He knows how to handle difficult conversations. He knows how to ask the hard questions while maintaining respect and professionalism. But on this particular evening, he would face something entirely different. Not someone struggling with tragedy or defending a controversial position, but someone who seemed determined to make the interview about everything except the questions being asked. The studio lights were hot and bright, as they always are. The familiar 60 Minutes set, iconic in its simplicity. 2 chairs, a small table between them, and the weight of millions of viewers watching from home. Anderson sat composed, his notes prepared, his questions ready. Across from him sat Meghan, dressed impeccably, microphone clipped to her jacket, makeup perfect under the studio lights. The interview began smoothly enough. Anderson opened with a straightforward question about her recent charitable work, a soft beginning to ease into the conversation. But instead of answering directly, Meghan paused, looked around the studio, and said something unexpected. "You know, Anderson, I have to say, this set is quite small. I was expecting something more grand for a show of this caliber." Anderson smiled politely, the kind of smile that comes from years of handling awkward moments. "We like to keep things intimate here. It helps create a more honest conversation." "Intimate," Meghan repeated, as if tasting the word. "Is that what we are calling it?" There was an edge to her voice that the audience at home could hear. Anderson, ever the professional, redirected. "Let me ask about the foundation you have been working with. What drew you to this particular cause?" Meghan shifted in her chair, crossing her legs in the opposite direction. "Before we get into that, I think we need to address something. The questions you sent over to my team, they were quite basic. Almost insulting, really. I have done hundreds of interviews, Anderson. I expected more from you." Anderson kept his composure. His expression remained neutral, but those watching closely could see the slightest tension in his jaw. "The questions are meant to let you tell your story in your own words. That is what our viewers want to hear." "Your viewers," Meghan said, leaning forward slightly, "want to hear the truth. Not some sanitized version you have decided is appropriate." "I am not sanitizing anything," Anderson replied calmly. "I am giving you the opportunity to speak about the work you are doing. That is why you are here, is it not?" Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that why I am here? Or am I here because your producers thought having me on would boost your ratings?" The accusation hung in the air. Anderson did not flinch. "We invite guests who have important stories to share. If you would prefer not to discuss your charitable work, we can talk about something else. What would you like to talk about?" "What would I like to talk about?" Meghan repeated. "How about we talk about how the media has treated me? How about we talk about the double standards? But no, you want to keep things safe and comfortable, do you not?" Anderson leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "We can absolutely discuss your relationship with the media. That is a fair topic. But I would appreciate if we could do so without attacking the integrity of this interview." "Attacking?" Meghan's voice rose slightly. "I am not attacking anything. I am simply pointing out that you seem more interested in controlling this conversation than actually having one." "I am interested in having a productive conversation," Anderson said, his voice still measured and calm, "but that requires both of us to engage in good faith." Meghan stood up suddenly, her microphone cord pulling taut. A production assistant in the shadows took a step forward, concerned. "Good faith? You want to lecture me about good faith when your entire industry has made a fortune off of tearing people like me down?" Anderson remained seated, looking up at her. "I am not your enemy, Meghan. I am simply trying to do my job." Your job, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. Your job is to sit there in your expensive suit and pretend to care while you ask shallow questions and nod sympathetically. Do not pretend this is about journalism. I have been a journalist for over 30 years, Anderson said, and for the first time, there was a hint of steel in his voice. I have reported from war zones, from natural disasters, from the scenes of unspeakable tragedy. I take my job very seriously, and I take the responsibility of this platform seriously. So yes, this is absolutely about journalism. Meghan pulled off her microphone, the sharp scratch of the clip audible in the quiet studio. Well, here is some journalism for you. This interview is over. Anderson stood now, not in anger, but in a final attempt to salvage the situation. If you are unhappy with the questions, we can adjust. We can take a break and regroup. But walking out accomplishes nothing. Walking out, Meghan said, accomplishes exactly what I want it to accomplish. It shows that I will not sit here and be disrespected. No one is disrespecting you, Anderson said firmly. I have been nothing but professional. Professional, Meghan scoffed. You call this professional? Bringing me here under false pretenses, trying to trap me with your questions? Anderson's patience, remarkable up until this point, was clearly being tested. What false pretenses? Your team agreed to every aspect of this interview. The topics, the format, everything. You knew exactly what this was going to be. I knew what you told me it would be, Meghan shot back. I did not know I would be dealing with someone who clearly has an agenda. My only agenda, Anderson said, his voice rising just slightly, is to have an honest conversation. That is it. But you have spent the last several minutes attacking me, attacking this show, and attacking the entire premise of why you are here. So if anyone has an agenda, perhaps you should look in the mirror. The words landed hard. The studio fell silent. Production crew members glanced at each other nervously. This had gone far beyond a typical difficult interview. This was personal now. Meghan's face flushed. How dare you speak to me that way? I am speaking to you, Anderson said, his composure returning, but his words no less pointed. The way I would speak to any guest who is being unreasonable. You are not special in that regard. Not special, Meghan repeated slowly. You have no idea who you are dealing with. Anderson sat back down, a clear signal that he was ready to continue if she was willing to be reasonable. Then help me understand. Sit down, and let us have the conversation you say you want to have. But Meghan was already moving toward the edge of the set. I do not need to explain myself to you or anyone else. This interview is finished. A producer appeared from off-camera, a younger woman with a headset and a clipboard. Ms. Markle, please, if we could just take 5 minutes. Meghan spun on her. I am not taking 5 minutes. I am leaving. Now get me out of here. Anderson watched this unfold with a mixture of professional disappointment and personal frustration. This is not how professionals behave, he said, not loudly, but clearly enough that Meghan heard him. She stopped, turned back. What did you just say? I said this is not how professionals behave. You came here for an interview. You are leaving because you did not like being asked to actually answer questions. That is not professional. That is childish. The insult, delivered calmly but unmistakably, was the final straw. Meghan's face went from flushed to almost crimson. You sanctimonious, self-righteous, pompous excuse for a journalist. You sit here in your little bubble, completely disconnected from reality, and you have the audacity to call me childish? Anderson stood again, and this time his voice was firm, authoritative. I think it is time for you to leave. Oh, I am leaving, Meghan said. Trust me, I am leaving. And everyone is going to hear about this. Everyone is going to know what kind of person you really are. They are going to know what kind of person you are, Anderson countered. Because all of this is on camera. Every word, every accusation, every insult. So yes, please tell everyone. Let them see for themselves. Meghan grabbed her bag from beside the chair, nearly knocking over the small table in the process. You have not heard the last of this. I am sure I have not, Anderson said dryly. 2 security personnel had appeared now, not threatening, but present. The producer tried one more time. Ms. Markle, please, can we just talk about this? There is nothing to talk about, Meghan snapped. I was promised a respectful interview, and instead I got ambushed by someone with an axe to grind. Anderson, still standing by his chair, shook his head slowly. The only person who came here with an axe to grind was you. I asked you basic questions about your charity work. That was it. Everything else, all of this, came from you. Basic questions, Meghan mocked. You would not know a real question if it hit you in your smug face. The producer put a hand on Meghan's arm, gently guiding her away from the set. Let us go this way, please. Meghan yanked her arm free. Do not touch me. The security guard stepped closer, and the producer backed off, hands raised in a placating gesture. No one is touching you. We are just asking you to come with us so we can sort this out privately. Sort this out? Meghan's voice echoed in the studio. There is nothing to sort out. This man is a disgrace. This show is a joke, and I will make sure everyone knows it. Anderson, watching this spiral completely out of control, made a decision. He turned to the camera operator. Cut the cameras. The camera operator looked to the producer, who nodded reluctantly. The red recording lights blinked off. But Meghan was not done. Even with the cameras off, she continued. You think turning off the cameras makes this go away? You think you can just erase what happened here? What happened here, Anderson said, his voice tired now, is that you came into the studio with a chip on your shoulder, and you have spent the entire time trying to pick a fight. I do not know what you were hoping to accomplish, but congratulations. You have succeeded in making yourself look exactly as unreasonable as you claim everyone else makes you out to be. The words were harsh, harsher than Anderson typically allowed himself to be, but the frustration of the last 20 minutes had clearly taken its toll. Meghan pointed a finger at him. You are going to regret this. The only thing I regret, Anderson replied, is agreeing to this interview in the first place. The producer finally managed to get between them, physically separating the two. Okay, that's enough, both of you. Anderson, please go to your dressing room. Miss Markle, we are going to escort you out of the building. Meghan looked like she wanted to say more, but the presence of the security guards and the obvious end of any chance to continue made her reconsider. She straightened her jacket, lifted her chin, and said with as much dignity as she could, Muster? Fine, I will see myself out. We will escort you, one of the security guards said politely but firmly. As Meghan walked toward the studio exit, she called back over her shoulder. You have not heard the last of this, Anderson. He did not respond. He simply stood there on the set, hands in his pockets, watching her leave. The studio crew began to move, packing up equipment, murmuring to each other about what they had just witnessed. The producer approached Anderson cautiously. Are you okay? Anderson nodded slowly. I have had worse. That was, the producer searched for the right word, intense. That was a waste of everyone's time, Anderson said. He picked up his notes from the table. Notes that had never been used. Questions that had never been answered. How much of that was recorded? All of it, until you called to cut the cameras. Anderson nodded. Good. Make sure it is preserved. Something tells me we are going to need it. As he walked off the set, the studio slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Crew members discussed what they had seen, already knowing this would be a story they would tell for years. The interview that never was. The guest who imploded. The host who kept his cool even as everything fell apart around him. Anderson retreated to his dressing room, closing the door behind him. He sat down heavily in the chair, loosened his tie, and allowed himself a moment of frustration. 30 years of journalism. thousands of interviews, and this is what it had come to. A guest more interested in creating drama than having a conversation. Back in the studio, the producer was on the phone with the executive producer explaining what had happened. The decision was already being made about how to handle this, what to air, what to say, how to address the complete failure of what was supposed to be a major interview. Meanwhile, Meghan was being escorted through the back corridors of the building, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. The security guards maintained a respectful distance, but made it clear she was not to deviate from the path to the exit. At the door to the street, Meghan stopped. "I can take it from here." The guard nodded. "Have a good evening, ma'am." She pushed through the door into the cool evening air where her car was waiting. As she slid into the back seat, the driver asked if everything was all right. "Just drive," she said curtly. Back inside, Anderson emerged from his dressing room, his tie removed, his jacket over his arm. He found the producer still on the phone and waited until she was finished. "What is the plan?" he asked. "We are meeting tomorrow morning to discuss it, but between you and me, I do not think we are airing any of that." Anderson nodded. "Probably for the best." "I am sorry," the producer said. "I know you put a lot of preparation into this." "So did a lot of people," Anderson replied, "but some things just are not meant to be." As he left the building, stepping out into the same evening air that Meghan had just moments before, he took a deep breath. Tomorrow, there would be meetings and discussions and decisions about how to handle this. But tonight, he was simply ready to go home. The studio lights were turned off one by one. The set was dismantled. The chairs where two people had sat, where a conversation should have happened, but instead a confrontation erupted, were rolled away into storage. And somewhere in the city, two people were processing the same event in very different ways. One frustrated that a professional opportunity had been squandered. The other convinced that standing up and walking out was the right thing to do. The interview that was supposed to happen never did. The conversation that could have been never was. Instead, what remained was a cautionary tale about what happens when egos clash, when expectations are not met, and when two people enter the same room with completely different ideas about what is supposed to happen. Anderson would do many more interviews after this. He would sit across from world leaders and celebrities, from whistleblowers and survivors. Some would be difficult. Some would be contentious. But none would quite match the sheer bizarre spectacle of the interview that imploded before it ever really began. For Meghan, this would become another chapter in a complicated relationship with the media. Another example, in her mind, of being treated unfairly. Another story to tell about being misunderstood. But for those who were there, who witnessed it firsthand, the story was much simpler. A guest came in looking for a fight. A host tried to maintain professionalism. And when those two forces collided, there was only ever going to be one outcome. The cameras had captured it all. The escalation, the accusations, the final bitter exchange. Footage that would be locked away, discussed in production meetings, but ultimately deemed too problematic to air. Because sometimes the most dramatic moments are the ones that never make it to television. The confrontations that happen when the lights are bright and the cameras are rolling, but the decision is made that the public does not need to see this particular moment. Anderson knew this. He had been in the business long enough to know that not everything that happens makes it to air. Sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. Sometimes letting something fade away is better than giving it oxygen. But he also knew that in the age of leaks and social media, nothing truly stays buried forever. Somewhere, someone would talk. The story would get out, in pieces, in fragments, in competing narratives. And when it did, people would choose sides. Some would say Anderson was too hard on his guest. Others would say Meghan was out of line from the start. The truth, as always, would be somewhere in the middle. Two people entered a studio expecting different things. One expected tough but fair questions, and a chance to share her perspective. The other expected a professional interview about charitable work and current projects. What actually happened satisfied neither of them. In the end, the only winners were the crew members who had a story to tell at dinner parties. The only losers were everyone who had worked to make the interview happen, and the audience who would never get to see what could have been a fascinating conversation. The studio was dark now, empty and quiet. Tomorrow it would be filled again with new interviews, new guests, new conversations. The cycle would continue as it always does. But for one evening, it had been the site of something rare in television, a complete and total meltdown. A guest and host unable to find any common ground. A conversation that never happened, and an interview that would be remembered more for what went wrong than for anything that went right. Anderson would reflect on it in the coming days, wondering if there was something he could have done differently. A different approach, a different tone, a different question that might have changed the trajectory. But deep down, he knew the truth. Some interviews are doomed from the start. Some guests come in with an agenda that has nothing to do with the questions being asked. And sometimes no amount of skill or experience can save a situation that was broken before it began.